Welcome to this journey, where shadows of history reveal tales so unsettling that even today their echoes disturb anyone who listens carefully. Before we start, tell me in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time you are listening. Because knowing when and where these forgotten memories reach you creates an invisible thread that connects our world with theirs across centuries. Imagine the unforgiving sun of Arizona in the year 1873, burning down upon barren valleys filled with silence broken only by the sound of wind across dry stone. In such a place events unfolded that would later be remembered as one of the most disturbing stories. Buried in the archives of the territory, a record so strange that it reads like a dark legend, but every line was carefully documented. This is the account known as the Copper Canyon Incident, centered around two sisters who welcomed weary travelers into their establishment with promises of comfort, yet what they served was not just beer and whiskey. It was something far darker. The Arizona Territory had existed for only a short time. Created after separation from New Mexico under the Arizona Organic Act, signed in 1863, governance remained weak and scattered military posts dotted the landscape. A law was nearly absent. Railroads had not yet reached this land. Travel was slow, dangerous, and communication almost impossible. Violence was common. The Apache Wars continued. Men like Geronimo resisted intrusion upon tribal lands. Settlers, miners, and drifters clashed every week. Prescott had been declared the capital in 1864, but still struggled to hold authority over wild lands. Tucson challenged its influence. Silver in Tombstone was not yet discovered. The gunfight at the OK Corral, still years away. This was Arizona before it became myth, raw, isolated, and lawless. Imagine a land where one marshal with a handful of deputies was expected to keep order across an area the size of a European country. Justice depended on influence, weapons, and personal reputation. It was in this atmosphere of neglect and opportunity that two women named Margaret and Elizabeth McKenzie arrived. Their appearance changed everything. The settlement where their story begins was called Bumblebee Creek, located northeast of Prescott, near the road that would later become the Black Canyon Highway. Bumblebee Creek looked like nothing more than a scattering of wooden buildings, a store, a few cabins, and one tall structure that caught every eye. A two-story place called the Copper Queen, built originally as a trading post, then a boarding house. Its thick adobe walls and heavy timber frame made it stand out from crude shacks around it. Inside were compartments hidden in the walls, constructed by its first owner, Heinrich Mueller, who died under unusual circumstances. His lips found discolored at death, suggesting poison or suffocation. His property passed hands until finally the McKenzie sisters purchased it in 1872. The women were aged 27 and 25, unusual figures in a harsh land dominated by miners, outlaws, and soldiers. Their sudden arrival was noticed in the local paper, which described them politely as respectable women from Missouri, opening clean lodgings with home-cooked meals for travelers. But what no one realized was that the sisters appeared as if conjured from dust. There were no earlier records of them, no trace of family, no explanation of their money. Deed records prove they paid cash for the property, something rare, especially for women alone in that era. Their sudden wealth raised no questions. Silence covered the beginning of their enterprise. As if the desert itself wanted to hide their arrival, the building was transformed. Rapidly, workers recalled the sisters, demanded strange modifications. Reinforced floors, false backs in wardrobes, secret compartments. They claimed it was for safety against raids. They paid in gold, and no one dared to ask questions. Elizabeth always carried a notebook sketching measurements. Wow. Margaret handled payments. In March 1872, the Copper Queen opened its doors. The paper praised it as a touch of refinement in rough country, describing Margaret as handsome, commanding, gracious, and Elizabeth as quiet, reserved, and precise. Rules inside where strict. Drunkenness, fighting, or lewdness were not tolerated, making the place unusual among Frontier saloons, miners, cowboys, and wanderers came, but so did wealthy travelers, lawyers, merchants, and investors, who found this place safer than filthy gambling dens. The sisters gained reputation quickly, yet remained distant from real friendships. They contributed to schools, churches, sheriffs' causes, always enough to appear noble. Margaret socialized with officials and influential visitors. Elizabeth moved silently, observing, never missing a detail for 6 months. Nothing seemed suspicious until one letter arrived. In August 1873, a woman from San Francisco named Eleanor Whitman wrote the Territorial Marshal asking about her husband Gerald, who had been traveling to Arizona to examine silver claims. His last message mentioned staying with 2 sisters near Prescott. Gerald never returned when officials checked the copper queen the sisters produced. A note claiming Gerald left his luggage with them, intending to continue south to Tucson. The handwriting, however, did not match what his wife recognized. Rumors spread. Gerald had been carrying thousands in gold and bank drafts, yet none were ever cashed in his name. The official report dismissed it as a man abandoning his old life, but Deputy James Currian secretly noted his suspicions. The sisters appeared too. Rehearsed something felt wrong. What followed in the next year was a chilling pattern. More men vanished, always those traveling alone with money. Each disappearance linked back to the Copper Queen. Whispers grew, but no one spoke aloud. Fear and silence ruled. Bumblebee Creek miners said openly they minded their own business. Harriet Schultz, the storekeeper's daughter, recalled that her father noticed Margaret buying unusual supplies. After certain guests stayed, large amounts of soap, coal, oil, or even tools, like saws and shovels. At night, her gloves sometimes hid stains that should not have been there. The sisters had created 2 types of rooms: basic for miners, premium for wealthy travelers. These premium rooms were always near the back wall, against the hillside, the very place connected to hidden modifications. Those rooms would later reveal their terrifying purpose. Margaret charmed guests, speaking endlessly, remembering details, prying gently until wealthy travelers confessed their holdings, plans, and family backgrounds. Elizabeth shadowed silently, carrying luggage, serving meals, appearing without sound. A female guest, Rebecca Tilson, wrote in her diary that Elizabeth's gaze unsettled her, and that she walked like a shadow. Margaret could make a guest talk about fortunes, investments, and properties as if it were casual conversation. William Stanton, of Philadelphia manufacturer, wrote that within an hour she learned his entire background, making him strangely comfortable until he later realized he had spoken too much, but by then it was too late. Men who stayed in those premium rooms often never appeared again. Explanations followed, notes in their handwriting saying they left for other destinations, but years later evidence showed Elizabeth practiced handwriting of many men, creating forgeries so perfect even banks accepted them. This efficiency showed cold calculation. By late 1873, more disappearances accumulated. Robert Cartwright, a banker from Chicago, arrived carrying bank drafts. He was shown to a premium room. Margaret dined with him. Elizabeth took his luggage next morning. He was gone. Margaret explained he left early with a note thanking them for hospitality weeks. Later inquiries came, but authorities accepted the story. What no one knew was that Cartwright had already been erased by the sisters. The first real evidence appeared when seasonal rains in early 1874 washed away soil near the creek. Behind the Copper Queen, a driver discovered bones, later confirmed as human-bound wrists, still visible. The official report claimed unknown deaths from violence, but Corian's private notes revealed the same cord from Copper Queen curtains was used for binding. Still, authorities dismissed it even as suspicions deepened. Margaret bribed officials, generously lending money to the marshal, who turned blind eyes. Meanwhile, the sisters continued carefully. Their notebooks coded victims, called stock details, listed as if recording business inventories. One entry translated decades later read Boston stock quality excellent. Processing scheduled. Margaret handles accounts. Elizabeth prepares special room, another chilling entry mentioned a saint. Louis attorney who awoke mid-procedure, requiring excessive measures leaving stains that forced closure for cleaning 3 days. The sisters explained the smell by claiming roof leaks had caused water damage. The hidden special room was reached through a wardrobe false back, a chamber cut into the hillside, 8 by 10 feet floor, sloping to a tunnel, opening into dense brush. Near the creek, archaeological studies, a century later, found traces of blood, iron rings for restraints, coal oil used for cleaning. The method was systematic. Victims drugged with laudanum, mixed in whiskey, moved to chamber, disposed of quietly. Valuables taken, handwriting, forged property, transferred letters sent to families, assuring them of business delays. Margaret spoke extensively to victims before their end, saying it helped her forge letters later. One chilling note in Elizabeth's diary admitted. M insists on speaking with them before procedure. Her forgeries have saved us many times. Still must be cautious. Each disappearance brought wealth, yet silence continued. The community feared the sisters respected them or owed them money. Officials dismissed inquiries, minors avoided suspicion, and newspapers praised them. The darkness grew unchecked. As months passed, whispers grew louder, but open confrontation never came, because every man in power had received favors or feared blackmail. Margaret lent money to officials, covered gambling debts. Elizabeth handled correspondence, even post office duties, giving her access to private letters. They knew secrets about judges, sheriffs, businessmen, everyone with influence. Some suspected, but none dared speak. A former deputy later confessed in notes that those women knew too much about too many men. Nobody wanted to ask questions. One widow from San Francisco, however, refused to remain silent. Eleanor Whitman traveled to Prescott herself in late 1874, demanding answers. She visited the Copper Queen, describing Margaret as overly polite, but with eyes like stone. Her persistence alarmed the sisters. A coded note later found in their ledger suggested they considered processing. San Francisco widow, despite complications, only the sudden arrival of her cousin prevented her from becoming. Another entry in their book. While she pressed officials, the sisters grew restless. By November 1874, nature itself intervened. A violent storm struck, causing part of the hillside behind the Copper Queen to collapse. When morning came, townsfolk discovered something terrifying. The collapse revealed a tunnel, a chamber, hidden behind the building. Inside were belongings of missing travelers. Pocket watches, clothing, letters, bank drafts, ledgers with coded entries describing victims' profits and disposal methods. Newspapers called it a house of horrors. Officials attempted to soften reports, but evidence was undeniable. The Prescott Miner published an understated line that proprietresses departed unexpectedly after storm damage, but rumors spread rapidly. The Sacramento Union ran a headline, House of Horrors, discovered in Arizona territory. Female proprietors suspected in multiple disappearances. Suddenly, the civilized ladies of Bumblebee Creek became monsters in print, but by then they were gone. Witnesses swore 2 women, matching their appearance, boarded a southbound stage during the storm night. Paying in gold coins, they vanished across the border into Mexico, never to face justice. Excavations near the creek uncovered scattered remains, bound wrists, fractured bones, signs of violent struggle. Some skeletons showed knife marks, others skull fractures. Forensic reports documented at least 11 confirmed victims' names, including Gerald Whitman, James Sullivan, Robert Cartwright, Charles Everton, and others. Families demanded justice. Pinkerton detectives investigated, discovering contradictions, lies, forged notes. But it was too late. The sisters had vanished. What remained was corruption. Revealed, the territorial marshal was removed. Governor resigned. Whispers of complicity spread, yet reforms never came. The Copper Queen passed into other hands, but business failed. Employees refused to stay. Diaries described strange sounds, cold spots, scratching from walls, until in 1887, a suspicious fire destroyed the building, leaving only foundation stones. Bumblebee Creek itself declined into a ghost town. Memories Buried under dust, yet the story refused to die. Decades later, researchers rediscovered evidence-coded notebooks, documents, bones, fragments, hidden artifacts in 1950s. Excavation scholars confirmed the horrifying methods, surgical tools, restraints, coal oil stains, human traces remained in soil. The dark legend became historical fact. Later documents revealed letters from officials warning the sisters before they escaped, proof that power shielded them more than walls. Did historians debated their psychology? Margaret charismatic, manipulative. Elizabeth silent, watchful, efficient. One dominant predator, one submissive accomplice. Together, they created a businesslike machine of murder victims, treated as stock profit, calculated, methodical, as if death itself were commerce. Criminologists later described them as rare partners in predation. Unlike impulsive killers, they ran an organized enterprise. One chilling ledger entry described processing. Completed yield, calculated expenses, noted profits, tallied, as if it were farm produce, not human live survivors, remembered unsettling details. Thomas Finch, mining engineer, wrote that Margaret served him whiskey with a peculiar anticipation in her eyes. He refused a second glass and stayed awake, barricading his door, hearing faint scratching behind walls. Perhaps that caution saved his life. He left at dawn, convinced later that decision preserved him. Had he trusted their smiles, he might never have left Bumblebee Creek alive. The final trail of the sisters fades into Mexico. One death record found in Hermosillo described a woman named Margarita Vasquez, age matching Margaret, dead by poisoning in 1902. Elizabeth never confirmed, but Mexican records describe an American widow, Elizabeth Wilson, running a boarding house where travelers disappeared. Her methods strikingly similar until she too vanished during Revolution. In 1915, perhaps, Elizabeth continued alone, repeating their dark trade until fire and chaos erased her tracks. Today, only stones remain where the copper queen once stood. Hikers report unease, silence heavier than air, though imagination likely feeds such feelings. In 1965, a plaque was placed reading, near this site stood the Copper Queen Saloon and boarding house, scene of numerous disappearances and murders during territorial period, a reminder of justice delayed and the dark chapters in our shared history. The McKenzie sisters challenge every assumption about frontier crime, because while legends glorify outlaws like Jesse James or Billy the Kid, the true terror came not from men with guns in daylight, but from women who smiled, offered shelter, and turned hospitality into horror. They exploited cultural blind spots, society that saw women as pure, nurturing, incapable of cruelty, never imagined them as predators. That disbelief became their camouflage. Communities chose silence, prosperity, reputation, protection of investment over justice. Lives were sacrificed for comfort and progress. The most disturbing truth is not their cruelty, but the complicity of those who ignored it. Families begged for answers. Officials dismissed them. Newspapers suppressed stories until storm forced truth into light. The Copper Canyon incident remains haunting because it shows monsters do not always lurk in wilderness. Sometimes they sit across a table, pour you a drink, and ask about your family while planning how to erase you. Thomas Finch wrote that civilization depends on trust. When a hand offers hospitality, we believe it means safety. The sisters shattered that belief forever. They proved that danger wears masks, sometimes the most elegant, most refined, most respectable masks, and that realization lingers longer than any ghost story. So as you listen, ask yourself if you had been a traveler riding into that valley in 1873, thirsty, weary, seeing the glow of Copper Queen lights, would you have stepped inside believing safety waited, or would you have sensed the shadows behind their smiles? History cannot answer, but perhaps your instincts would decide whether you left alive or became another forgotten entry in their coded ledgers. This is the legacy of Margaret and Elizabeth McKenzie, the sisters who served more than beer.